In the last video, we looked at the example for statistical functions in Excel and worked with dataset number 1. For the submission for this topic, you will need to work with dataset 2 and dataset 3 to calculate the appropriate analysis. So whether it's a sample or a population, you will look at the statistics or parameters of the data, and then each of the questions have a component to comment on a various feature or property of the data set. Okay, so looking at our spreadsheet, what we have already done is example with dataset 1, and you will need to complete the analysis and comment section, so everything in yellow, for dataset 2 and dataset 3. Okay, now we're going to start looking at the normal distribution function in Excel, and that starts on page 3 of the notes of your computer lab. And we will apply basic Excel functions to organize and format the data and use the norm dist to calculate probabilities and create formulas to calculate the desired probabilities. Okay. So our task is to complete the following questions in Excel as outlined by the instructions and submit your work in the course Dropbox. So for these questions, you'll need to use the norm dist function. And the norm dist function is a built-in function in Excel. Oops. So our norm dist function in Excel, and we'll use that to calculate the cumulative probability. The cumulative probability is a different area than the area that the table we used in class gave us. So in class, we always looked at the area under the curve between 0 and a relative value z. But what Excel does is gives you the cumulative probability looking from the left, so including everything to the left all the way to our value of z. And that z value that it looks at can be either to the left of the mean or to the right of the mean. And that all just matters. It's all relative to what your value of x and your value of x bar are. But because our built-in function in Excel gives us the area under the curve from negative infinity all the way to our z value, we need to use that calculated area in a different way to answer questions. So we're going to look at 3 different types of questions. Okay, the norm dist function in Excel has different parameters that it accepts. It expects you to type in your x value, and that's the value of your observation. So that's the value that we typically converted into a z-score. Then it also wants us to look for or to identify the mean and the standard deviation. And those are either given or calculated. It depends on which, if you're given the values, then you don't need to calculate them, but sometimes you do. And this value for cumulative, we're always going to set equal to 1. For the purposes of this course. Okay, that tells us that we want an area. Okay, the cumulative area accepts logical value, so that means that it's expecting you to either type in 0 or 1, and we're typing in 1 to indicate that it's true. If you were to type in a 0, it gives you the value on your curve, so it would give you a value, actually the value right at z, so the value of the function at that point and not the cumulative probability. So make sure you type in 1 there, not 0. Okay, there's 3 different cases that we're going to look at. So the first case is if the question asks for the probability less than or equal to a certain value. And what that will look like is if we want our function to be less than or equal to a certain value. And it doesn't matter if that value is less than or greater than the mean, so your value would be x. This one's drawn to look like it's less than the mean, or sorry, greater than the mean, but it doesn't matter. This is what the function already gives you. So we would just use our regular norm dist function in Excel. Whereas if we are asked to calculate the probability of a particular value being greater than or equal to a certain value of x, we need to perform a calculation. And I'll show you in a physical sense what that looks like. So we have, we want to know when it's greater than, so the right of our value of x. Okay, our norm dist function, so what we had in part A, it tells us everything to the left here. This is what norm dist gives us. So in order to calculate the desired probability, we need to do 1 minus the value with the norm dist function. Okay, so you want everything except for the norm dist, which means it's 100% minus a percentage that, or the decimal equivalent that's under here. Okay, and then the last case is where you want the probability between two values. And what that looks like is you have two different values of x, x1 and x2. Use your imagination here. So we want the value, the area between them. Okay, so we're going to have to use norm dist calculation twice. The first calculation will give us up to x1. So that's one thing we'll do then. We were going to look at the area up to our second value using norm dist. And to find the desired area, we subtract the two. So this area here is going to be the area up to the higher value minus the area up to the lower. And so what we are doing when you want the area between two values is to subtract the two answers. And we're going to go through the various steps to do that in Excel. So in Excel, you're going to take your workbook that you've already been working on, and I'm actually going to just say, I'm going to take out this instruction because we already have our workbook open. So make sure you keep your work organized. Try setting up a table as shown below. So I've actually already set it up for you in Excel, and it's going to say question, you want A, B, and C. You have your norm dist calculation, your probability that you require, and the probability calculation. And we need to calculate and identify the mean or standard deviation if it's not given to us. Then in step 2, you select the correct worksheet. So make sure you're working on the correct worksheet. Once we get to the submission questions, there's a question 2 submission sheet and a question 4 submission sheet that have already been created for you. You identify the mean and standard deviation and put them into the appropriate cells. So in our example, it's cell B1 and B2, but depending on where you've put the titles, you want to just put them in the appropriate places. In column A, you want to identify the part of the question that you're calculating, so A, B, and C, if there's potentially 3 problems. And each of those rows is going to require you to calculate a probability. For part 5, for each part of the question, use the norm dist function and the given data value of x to calculate the cumulative probability in the column B. So what we're doing is we are taking our x value and we're using norm dist to calculate everything up to the value of x. Then in column C, we identify using words what type of probability we're looking for. So we're looking for less than, greater than, or between. And then in column D, we create the formula based on the 3 types that we went through. So these 3 types, that gives you the formulas required to get the required probability. And then we'll format the probability. So the last step is to format to 4 decimal places. Okay, so in the given example, we have in a national study of computer viruses, the security software collected from 45 major corporations to determine the average number of new viruses created every week is on average 29.7 and a standard deviation of 10.51. Based on the sample, we want to answer the following questions. So what is the probability that having more than 40 viruses per week? Part B, less than 20 viruses per week, and in part C, between 23 and 33 viruses per week. So heading over to our Excel spreadsheet, we are going to identify our mean and our standard deviation. I'm just going to go back and check that those values are correct, and they are. Okay, so make sure you carefully go through and check all your work as you complete it. Now we need to complete the norm dist calculation. So for norm dist, we want to use our built-in function in Excel. For norm dist, we want more than 40 viruses, so our value of x is 40. We have a mean. Use cell referencing to click on the mean of 29.7, and then click on the standard deviation of 10.51. So you can see I have cell references here, not the explicit values. And then a 1 for cumulative probability. We're going to press enter, and that gives us the probability of being between negative infinity all the way up to 40, so less than 40, but we're actually looking for the probability of being greater than 40. So the probability calculation that we need to perform is 1 minus the probability that we have, and it is 0.163538363. And I'm going to put some statements below. And what we can say is, so statement, the probability of, and looking back at the question, the probability of there being more than 40 viruses per week is 0.1635, and that's our probability rounded to 4 decimal places. Okay, so I'm going to actually round this by right-clicking, selecting Format Cells, Number, and changing it to 4 decimal places. Okay. In the next case, we're looking for the probability of having less than 20 viruses. So again, using our norm dist function with the value of x of 20 and the mean in B1, the standard deviation in B2, and 1 for cumulative, we get a probability from negative infinity up to 20, but we're looking for the probability of less than, which is exactly what we just calculated. So we can say equals and reference the calculation that we've already done. And again, we're going to have to round all 3 of these, so I'm going to just format all 3 of them at once, and using 4 decimal places, we can give a final answer. Okay, so I'm going to pick this up in another video because I only have 15 seconds left. Make sure that you follow these steps carefully and pause the video as you complete your work. For part B of the normal distribution practice problem, we calculated the probability that our normal distribution was less than 20. So we typed in norm dist at x, so 20, and a standard deviation, or sorry, a mean of 29.7, and in B2 we have our standard deviation of 10.51, and 1 for cumulative probability. And we are looking for the probability less than 20. And when we're looking for a probability less than a value, it's just our norm dist cumulative probability. So we just type in equals and use the probability calculation and format it to 4 decimal places. So we need to write a final statement. And our final statement is the probability of there being less than 20 viruses per week is 0.1780, or you could write 17.80%. Okay, so next now we need to calculate the probability of being between 2 different values. In order to do so, we need to calculate 2 different probabilities. So we use the norm dist cumulative function for the x value of 23 and also the x value of 33. So when you're calculating the probability between 2 different values, you need to use 2 different rows in your calculation. So the second row we use 33 with our mean and our standard deviation. So we want between these 2 values, and we know from our handout on page 3 that it's the third type where you are going to be between 2 values and you subtract the 2 answers. So you find the difference in the answers. And when you find the difference, you want to take the upper value and subtract the lower value. And I've done so using cell referencing, so I've calculated my probabilities already. Find the difference. It's already formatted to 4 decimal places. And I can say the probability of there being between 23 and 33 viruses per week is 0.3613. Okay, so we are now done the practice example for the normal distribution problem. You can see here I've calculated the answer to 3 different questions using probabilities, identifying what type of probability I was required to find, and my final answers, as well as final statements. And to complete this lab, you have 2 different submission questions, submission question 3 and submission question 4. The headers are already here for you, and I'll identify the values that you will have to calculate. So you need to fill in all of these relevant values and identify a statement. So these various fields will be here and ready to go for you when you come in to complete your assignment. Okay, so make sure that you try each of these questions on your own and get in contact with me if you're having any difficulty. I'm happy to jump on WebEx and share my screen with you and walk you through the steps to make the calculations. Okay, the one thing to add is that for question 4, I'll zoom in, you have a data set as opposed to just a mean and standard deviation being given. So you'll need to calculate the mean by using average and typing the range of values in. And for the standard deviation, you'll want to use the standard deviation of the sample to calculate the standard deviation of these values. Then you can proceed and calculate the necessary probabilities. Okay, good luck, and on D2L you will find the solutions given to these topics. So if you have any questions at all, make sure you can refer to the solutions to compare your work. The solutions will be a PDF and not the Excel file. You're required to submit the PDF. You're required to submit your Excel file to D2L so I can view your full solutions, but I've put a PDF of the solutions up as a guide. Okay, best of luck. Take care.